Everyone, and it's safe to say that you have already saw the title of the video, having clicked on it. In that case, you would know that this game was rather quiet. All Kasparov did was to sacrifice both rooks, a knight, and a bishop, and still somehow emerging in a winning endgame and going on to win. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, Garry Kasparov was playing with the white pieces, and his opponent was none other than fellow chess legend Vasilij Topalov. He's also known, like Kasparov, to like a fight on the chessboard, of course. So, Kasparov was playing white, and he played e4. This is definitely the move you want to be playing if you're a fighter, emphasize on the board. And as Garry recalled in his annotation of this game, Topalov's very first move just surprised him, and this is a very huge statement because there are only 20 moves and many of them are rubbish, like b5. It just hangs upon out of nowhere. Well, this move with d6. This is known as the perch defense. I've had a video on it, of course. You can watch it whenever you like it. And the reason this move surprised him, of course, is that it just gives white the center. At a low level, it's definitely playable. Even at like 2,000 FIDE, I think it's still playable, even though it's gonna perhaps give you some uncomfortable positions, but at a top level, it really is dangerous to play such openings. So, Kasparov, very principled, takes the center. You should also do that when you can do it. Knight f6, knight to c3, g6, bishop e3, bishop d7, and queen d2. So, Kasparov has just started this battery, brought this battery over here, and is having eyes on castling long. And if like also castles short, the stage will be set for an amazing fight where pawns will be flying over the board this way and this way. Of course, drawing arrows is not my strong suit, so excuse me for that. So here, Topalov played a very wise move, which is to play this move pawn to c6. So if he had castled, right, he might have just gone under a huge attack. For example, I would probably play f3, so that I will be able to play g4, h4, and then just go on an attack, which is definitely very dangerous because I have not yet decided my king, right? It may just stay in the center. It doesn't have to castle. So the wiser decision is to keep the king in the center and now play this move c6. This move also helps to build this pawn chain, right? To bring the pawns up together in an attack on the queen side. The pawn moves up to f3, the idea we talked about just a few seconds ago, stops this knight from going over here to attack this bishop, and you're having eyes on playing our own pawn to g4. So b5 is played, not yet castling, of course, and just putting the pawns forward exactly as you're taught. Just kidding, you should not really try these stuff at home. Knight to e2 is played, knight d7, and now bishop to h6. So, of course, this trade is very beneficial, not winning for white, of course, but this leaves black with some dark squares which are not really well covered, because this bishop will just go. Bishop takes h6 and bishop takes h6. So it's of course very clear that black cannot castle kingside this way, that they have to bring these two guys out. I mean, the queen is not a guy, but anyways, and just castle long. Having pushed these pawns forward like this, like a madman. Well, bishop to b7 is played, and pawn to a3. So this is just a waiting move, at some point stopping b4, because black cannot really attack on the queen side anymore, because the king wants to go there, right? You cannot open the side where your king is castling. That's also a good rule of thumb. The pawn goes to e5. Very nice move from Topalov. Gains some space in the center, because he didn't have any pawns over there. Classic theory and classic knowledge just says to put your pawns there in the center. And that's exactly what he did. Long castles by Garry. So it's developing very well. This knight will move out of the way. Then the bishop may come out. Not there, of course. For example, here. And the game will go on. The queen goes to e7. And now everything is prepared for this move. Also, this move queen g7 never really works because of rook g8 and everything is just defended and you have to go back and you've made no progress. So instead of playing that move, which is rubbish, sorry about that, Kasparov plays king b1. So these moves were very useful. it just guards this square, for example. There is no way a queen can just infiltrate there and checkmate from the back door. Yeah, I mean, it's also sort of a waiting move. Maybe the knight wants to go to this square in the future, and maybe some other ideas. Let's see what black plays. They play a6. So they do not castle again. So the king is just in the center for 12 moves already. Again, do not try this at home. I have to emphasize, these are top players playing, and they have reasons for making such mistakes. Well, a6 is played to strengthen b5 because we want to move this pawn off of the square, because this pawn is in the way. This pawn is in the way of the bishop, and the bishop would seriously want this pawn to just perish. This pawn will try to go to c5 now, that this pawn is just protected, and to gain some space in the center. So the knight goes to c1. It's an inaccuracy, but just forget the engine. This is still very fine for white and long castles, which is again a mistake. Just forget these. Knight b3 and pawn takes and rook takes. So you see, this position is very, very unclassical, to say the least, because the king is here and he has pushed, Topalov has pushed every single pawn forward. But look at white's king, right? It's just sleeping, very nice. It's got good nutrition, good everything. Very loyal horses as his guardians as well. But look at the horrendous place of the black king, really. Black plays pawn to c5, so he just pushes another pawn carelessly. Wait, carelessly is of course an overstatement. The rook goes back to d1, the knight goes to b6, and now pawn to g3. So this bishop really didn't have any room. It could have gone to these two squares, and it's just rubbish on these two squares. So logically, Gary brings the option to go over here, which is very active. It also gives a check. The king goes to b8, just getting out of that. And now knight a5. So just forget these. These are still very accurate. This is just the engine playing a bit annoying. And this bishop, if it goes, you really cannot play without, a bishop when you've pushed pawns like this, all these squares, or weak, and you have to keep the bishop, even if it goes to such a miserable square. At least it still has some eyes over here. The bishop goes to h3, the final piece is activated. That's exactly, again, what you should be doing. Bring all your pieces in, exactly. See how they've done it. And now it's time for the rooks, right? The rooks to come into the game. Well, d5 is played before that. So he's trying to strike in the center and says, okay, this knight is misplaced. It wants to be here so that it at least puts some pressure over here. This queen is misplaced. It wants to be here so that it again puts pressure on this pawn. But you're playing very badly, Gary, and I'm going to play d5. Well, firstly, Kasparov gives a check. It's okay, you think my queen is misplaced? Well, take this. Check. Now king a7. So this was, I think, the only move. Yeah, the only move, because you really don't want to hang your knights, The king goes to a7, and you see it's a very, very dangerous spot. The king has no moves. The king just has no moves. This sneaky knight over here has eyes on a magic royal fork, but this bishop is keeping it out of that for the moment. The rook now goes to the e1 square. So, I mean, you may wonder why I did draw that arrow to a5. Here, I want to give you a sneak peek of Kasparov's amazing intuition and visualization. And here in his notes, he said that at this point, I was probably expecting a draw, but there was a picture that really amused me. Yes, that's the good word. And that was the image of the king on e5, which is amazing. Of course, for that you have to give many pieces up, and that's how our attack begins. Well, d4 was played by Topalov. You may say, how can this happen? The pieces are so stranded. Well, the knight goes to d5. It just jumps in, and the knight takes, and the pawn takes. The queen is under attack, so you cannot take On d5, the queen goes to d6, and you may think, well, I mean, this pawn is going, the queens are getting traded, what am I doing? This knight is very rubbish, and we're going to get ready for the next game. However, Kasparov had other ideas. He threw the first haymaker. Rook takes d4. Well, and then an amazing move. What did I say? M&As. An amazing move. So, here, of course, taking it was what Topolov did called a bluff. The reason, of course, for this being a very nice move is that I'm firstly just defending this guy. I have won a pawn, and if you do not take and do not try to call the bluff, I'm just up a full pawn. The pawn took on d4, but now it's the start of an amazing attack. Rook to e7 check. So this move just came out of nowhere. The queen cannot really take. It is not because of knight c6, because this very, very weird bishop just takes our knight, and we are losing this game at this point. But it is the longer combination, which is this move, queen takes d4. The king, and only go to b8, and if it does, well, we go queen to b6 check. The king has no moves. You see how the pawns moving caused severe trouble for the black king. And now, if you just block like this, I take, and if you block like this, now I can give a fork, because this bishop is pinned, and I will win your queen. So they cannot take the rook. The king moves to b6, and now, well, we have this move, queen takes d4, giving up the knight. Of course, this was perhaps the only move. It really didn't require much imagination. At this position, the king takes on a5, and you can exactly see what my idea was, right? Move 21, Kasparov imagined the position with the king on a5, and now move 26, the king is on the very square itself. So now what do we do? The pawns can also attack, right? b4 check. The king is only one legal move, king to a4, and now we get even closer. Queen to c3. Of course, this is not really that brilliant. It's a fake brilliance. The rook, of course, cannot be taken because of this checkmate. They have to take on d5. And now, well, rook to a7. This pawn is amazingly weak. So is this king, of course. And that's why this whole combination works. The bishop goes to b7, and you may think, well, everything is defended. This bishop's doing nothing, and surely now I have to resign, right? But no, Kasparov again had other ideas. Rook takes b7. They cannot take, of course, this arrow is fake. The queen is overloaded. They cannot defend both the mating square and the bishop. Of course, taking the rook now would lead to checkmate, so you have to keep an eye on the square. Queen to c4 is played. So you still cannot trade queens, of course, because you're down material. Instead, Kasparov took on f6. Now Topolov is still up 1 point in material, but this pawn is hanging, and there's really just no way to defend it anymore. The king takes on a3, so I think rook a8 was perhaps best, but here he just calls the bluff, thinks that after queen takes a6, check, king takes b4, the king is safe, and it really feels like it is safe, right? Because the queen is just defending this guy. There is no check, nothing, right? But there is. It's not about a queen sacrifice or a rook sacrifice. It's about a pawn sacrifice. So the same way we play b4 check, we can also play c3 check. The pawns are very, very mighty attackers, especially in the king pawns, when the king is too far, really, away from its homeland. The king takes, so of course queen takes would just be met by this and this, which is a ladder mate. You would have to block with the queen, and I will just checkmate you next move. However, the king cannot really go anywhere else. The king takes. Now we give check, and you may say, well, why does this matter so much? It's not like it is very important. The king has many squares to go to. Well, it goes to d2. Let's just take some options out of our list. King b3 loses because of this this checkmate. Very nice ladder checkmate, and well, king to d3 loses to bishop f1, which wins the queen, of course. Queen to a1 check, and now king b4 also. Wait a second, what is this doing? Anyways, so king to b4 would perhaps be met by some check like this, I guess, and then calculate this thing. I mean, of course, you cannot go to the sides, and you cannot block either because I just give check, which is a very nice move, of course. Anyways, king d2 was played, and here again you may say, well, the attackers run out of attackers. What a sentence! Amazing. Queen to b2, check. Now there are like a few squares, of course. King d1 is seemingly the safest. Again, you kind of go to d3, of course, because of that fork. And if you move on to the e file, the rook will come in with check. The king goes to d1, and now it really seems like everything is over. We've also got very few pieces. But there's only one move. There's only one move, and only one move. If not for that, you're like horrendously losing because you're down by so much material, and your king is also exposed. You've thrown all the pawns away. Bishop to f1. Well, of course, you cannot take because of a very nice checkmate, like this. However, the queen can just move, right? You do not have to just take the bishop. If, for example, the queen moves away to c6, for example, I will checkmate on e2. So it has to keep guarding on here. But what if it goes to e6, right? Well, then I'll give a checkmate on this square. Amazing, right? So the queen has to guard both e2 and c1, but it can't from any other square, from any square other than c4. So what do? They counterattack us. Well, now again there's only one move which wins you the game. The other move draws. I mean, taking the queen on c4 is just as good as a draw. I mean, it's also very difficult still for black to defend, but this is not a win. The correct move is to give up the rook. And now, of course, it's very clear because if you take, I'll just take your queen, and I'm winning. And also, if you try to take, of course, it's just mate, and you cannot take my queen, right? Because it's pinned. That's the whole point of the move rook d7. So after rook d7, Topalov, out of desperation, took bishop takes c4, pawn takes c4, and queen takes on h8. So white finally sees the opportunity of being up in material. But the game is still very complex. Look at this pawn. This pawn is 3 down squares from promotion, and this king is over here, so the c2 is a check. That's very important. The rook is very active. The queen is on the corner. So it's still a mission. Job's not done. Rook d3 is played. Getting over here, having ideas of c3. Most likely, of course, to play c3. The queen goes to a8. Very, very accurate. c3 is played, and now queen to a4 check. So the king is forced away from the defense of the c2 square. If you go to d2, I'll of course just give a check and just drive you away from that square anyway. But the king goes to e1. Now the pawn goes to f4. Very safe move, just to defend the pawn, and this pawn structure is very nice. The pawn goes to f5, and now the king goes to c1. So it's a very safe move. Now there is no way you can just promote because the king is in the way, and you can never really give a check because if you do, I'll just go up. And the rook goes to d2, and finally the queen goes to a7. Looking on these ideas, and also, of course, looking on this pawn, after which every single one of the pawns will fall, and I'll just promote my own pawns. Topalov, unfailingly in this position, resigned and threw in the towel. An amazing game. Thank you for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed this game and perhaps learned something from it. I also appreciate it if you like to subscribe and share it with a friend of yours who may find this helpful. As always, thanks for your support, and until the very next video, take care.